Hey guys, please do me a big favor and like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the C Show. I got Larry the lawyer here with me, and we're going to start with our breaking down of presidential races and our race for the White House. Tonight, we're going to start with the 1948 presidential race. Larry, how are you?
Doing fine, thank you. How are you, Chris?
I can't complain, man. Just from before I get started, a lot of this is going to be similar to a replay to 2016, and I'll get into some of all that numbers later. But just looking at this, and you can add whatever you think should go in here. Military, the political situation looks like going into 48. You had the Republicans in Congress. Truman was standing at about 36% in the polls. The U.S. was in a recession. He had vetoed the Taft-Hartley Act, which was an extension of the Wagner Act regarding unions and right to work. You had race relations as far as integrating the military was beginning to become an issue. And then you had the Marshall Plan, which was out there. And it looked like the biggest voting bloc was going to be farmers. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, what I think is the 1948 election was very important for really a few reasons. One is that this is the first peacetime election, even though we've technically started the Cold War in 1947. So we've had four Democratic regimes starting in 1932 with Roosevelt, and then after Roosevelt died in 1945 with President Truman. So basically, the country, or a lot of the country, is looking ahead economically and politically, and hopefully not militarily. They're obviously there are important things like the GI Bill, which will be coming up. Probably, in my opinion, Truman's biggest mistake was to veto Taft-Hartley. Taft-Hartley was a bill to aid union representations of workers. The reason I'm saying I believe it was a mistake is because Truman is a man of the people, and the workers are a great, I don't want to say majority, but a great part of the people that Truman, in one fell swoop, really came up against.
The workers. Okay.
Workers.
So
common labor. Yeah.
When the thing first kicked off, now this is the polling situation, and we'll go through it. Is in February, Truman actually had a lead over Dewey. He had 46-41, and Wallace was at 7%. Now he had started his progressive movement a few years earlier when Truman had fired him as Secretary of Commerce over, well, it was his disagreement over the Marshall Plan. Was that right?
Yes, but also one of the again another reason why Wallace went out on his own was because of the Taft-Hartley veto.
So it looks like that the Taft-Hartley thing is going to be major in this. So
absolutely.
Okay, so the situation goes on, and I know you did the Republican thing. So in the Democratic side, there was a lot of anti-Truman movement. James Roosevelt, FDR's nephew, he was trying to get rid of Truman. And there was a draft Eisenhower movement. And
that's also correct.
He withdrew his name from consideration on July 10th. Then there was also a move to get Supreme Court Justice Douglas, and he withdrew his name. And finally, Senator Pepper from Florida was going to challenge Truman, but he withdrew on the 16th because of this. He didn't like Truman's stance towards the Soviets. Do you know much about Pepper as far as that goes? He thought Truman was being too aggressive, from what I've gathered.
I do. So let's talk about the 1947 Truman Doctrine. We'll start on that. American policy towards the Soviets was either one of two issues. One is, did they want to contain the Soviets' satellites in Eastern Europe, or did they want to roll them back? Now, Truman ultimately wanted to roll them back to free these satellites, Poland, ultimately Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, which later went to Red China, Yugoslavia, which became independent, and East Germany. So the issue is, but they had to stop civil wars. And the major civil wars that Truman was trying to stop were in Greece and Turkey. Now, the civil war in Greece was a major battle. Turkey, not so much. But because of the enmity between the Greeks and the Turks, in order to be fair, Truman had to spend as much money on the Turks as he did on the Greeks.
Okay.
Now, also, then we go into the Marshall Plan. Now, the Marshall Plan was to protect Western Europe, to make sure Western Europe had the economics, money, industry, and military to stand up to the Soviets.
Hey, let me ask you one quick question. I read that were they trying to get the Soviets involved in that at first? Because I read that that Stalin rejected it, and then they came up with the Molotov plan. So I didn't know if they was trying to originally get the Soviets to work with them, or they started off divided.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, they definitely wanted the Soviets to work with them because the Soviets had been our ally during World War II. But by that point, part of wanting to work with them was to allow the satellites freedom, to make their own minds, whether they to have free elections to see if they wanted to be in the Soviet bloc or the free bloc. And when Stalin said no, and he was basing his no on an agreement that he had with Churchill during the war, and that agreement was which Eastern European states would be controlled by Britain and which Eastern European states would be controlled by Russia, the Soviet Union. Greece was supposed to be controlled by England, or halfway. Greece was supposed to be controlled by England. Poland was supposed to be half and half, and the rest of the eastern satellites was supposed to be controlled by Russia. Not the greatest deal that Churchill ever made. It brought down the Iron Curtain.
Okay, so as we go into by April, the numbers are reversed. Dewey's up 47-39. Walls is still at 7. And by the time they get to the Democratic convention, it's at 49-38-6. Now, I'm just guessing the situation just kept deteriorating for Truman. That's why the poll number switched. From what you just explained, is there anything that you know that happened between February and April other than that?
Well, just that there was knowledge that Truman was planning to integrate the military. I know that happened about 4 days after the Democratic convention. There was knowledge that Truman was very strong on civil rights. And there was knowledge that Truman wanted to go ahead with helping farm labor and helping the workers as opposed to major corporate interests. The Republicans were the party of the upper class at this point. They were the party of the Eastern elite. some of the Midwestern states. But if you and I'm jumping ahead, but if you look at November 2nd, the 1948 election, you'll find out that the Democrats carried Texas, Oklahoma, and every state west of Texas and Oklahoma except Oregon.
So, going into this convention, so we had so it's in the Senate paper. So there were a lot of things were going against him going into this thing. The civil rights plank that was somewhat symbolic in many ways, but that was originally put forward, it angered the North and Western liberals because they wanted a much more. And the Southern leadership was angered that it was put in at all. Right. Texas Governor Dan Moody and Tennessee Cecil Sims wanted a plank from the status quo. There was a Representative Andrew Billmiller. He was from Wisconsin, and he wanted it more direct than Truman's. And that was the one that Hubert Humphrey actually introduced. Truman went against the advice of his advisors who told him to take the center road. That's when Strom Thurmond and 36 delegates walked out. What's your take on that civil rights plank? It ended up passing 651 to 582, by the way, so it was a very close vote.
Right. What I think of the civil rights plank is Truman thought that the blacks were a neglected minority, and he wanted them to be more into the mainstream. Obviously, he wanted their votes as well. But you look at the South, and the South is still solid Democratic. It's the solid South. It'll be that way until 1964. Richard Russell, who's the senator from Georgia, and is the basically was a segregationist, was giving Truman a big battle. When you look at the nomination results, you see that Truman was nominated by 947 votes, and Russell got a mere 263. And Strom Thurmond was nominated with the Dixiecrats. But basically what happened was 36 members walked out of that convention. And by walking out of the convention, they started their own political party. Thurmond was not the head of the walkout. He just ultimately became the presidential candidate.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Larry, but yeah, you're right, because he's often credited as being the one who led the walkout, and he's not. He wasn't. He wasn't even the first choice. Arkansas Governor Ben Laney, was that his name?
Yes, Laney. Yes.
Yes, he was the first choice, and he turned it down.
Right. He wanted to stay with the Democratic Party.
Well, and I'll get into that in just a second when we get into the fall about that right there, because I've got some stuff wrote. I've got some stuff wrote down about that. So, but anyway, I want to get at something else right here. Then Truman tried to appease the liberal wing of the party and offered the nomination to Justice Douglas, and he refused. And then it went to Senator Barkley from Kentucky. I don't know much about Barkley. Was he a liberal or
no? He was more a man in the middle. He could go either way. He was a politician. He'll also run again in 1952 against Stevenson for the nomination, and he won't get it. But he was, he was, not really descript either as a liberal or conservative.
All right, so then we got, and the Mississippi Governor Wright becomes Strom Thurmond's running mate. Wallace had already had who did Wallace had as his running mate again?
Oh, I'm having a senior moment.
You know, I've got it written down and I lost it. But he was very I can't remember his name. But anyway, that's not important. So tell us about you did the study or the numbers on the Republican nominations. Tell us about that.
The Republicans were very interesting. You all realize that in today's elections, people normally go into the primary with a majority. Well, in 1948, no Republican had a majority going into the primaries. On the first ballot, Dewey received 434 votes. Robert Taft, a conservative Republican from Ohio, and William Howard Taft's son, received 224.
Wow.
Harold Stassen, who was a very liberal Republican from Minnesota, had received 157. And Vandenberg, who was the Senate President pro tem of the Senate, because it was one of the few years the Republicans had the majority in the Senate, had 62 votes. And that was the first ballot. So you're going to need a little under 550 votes to win the Republican nomination. So the second ballot, Dewey gets closer at 515. Taft gets a little more too. He gets 274. Stassen goes down to 149, and Vandenberg remains at 62. Now, what's going on here is there are a lot of Republican votes for favorite son candidates. Pennsylvania Senator Edward Martin has 73 votes. Massachusetts Senator Leverett Saltonstall has the Massachusetts votes. Earl Warren, basically the only contest Earl Warren won was in California, and he has most, if not all, of the California votes. And there are others. So, and what these people wanted to do was they would hopefully get into a contest where, and when we go into some of the more the past elections, you'll see people not winning until the 20th or the 30th vote in a convention, and these people didn't start anywhere near close to a majority. So what happens is that Stassen, Taft, and Vandenberg decide to do a dump Dewey movement. And the three of them together would have enough votes to beat Dewey if they could take a few more votes from somewhere else.
Okay.
So basically, they agree to stop Dewey, but they can't agree on who was going to be the nominee. So in the second vote, all three of them kept their only vote. The only thing they agreed to do was not share with Dewey any votes. So the third time, Taft comes to Stassen and says, "You should resign and give me your votes." Stassen says, "No, I have a better chance of beating Dewey than you do, because I'm in the moderate to liberal wing of the party." Taft says, "This is not going to work out. I'm going to resign, and I'm going to suggest that my voters vote for Dewey." And that's basically what Taft did, and everybody else did also. So on the third ballot, Dewey got 1,094 votes and became the presidential candidate. Now there are two. I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that's where I wanted to make when I said that 2016 was like a mirror image. That's where I wanted to make my first comparison. Of course, it didn't go to the convention, but in the primaries, if you remember, there was a Stop Trump movement. Rubio was urging his supporters in Ohio to vote for John Kasich. Kasich was telling his supporters to vote for Rubio in Florida. There was one image of Ted Cruz and Rubio shaking hands behind Trump's back as they were all trying to block him from getting the delegates. So that was that was just the first comparison I was going to make as far as that 2016 race was the Stop Trump movement and how far they went as far as using I'll campaign in this state, you campaign in that one. That was similar to that. But I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's all right. That was very good. But now I wanted to just step back a little, and I wanted to talk about two of the Republican primaries.
Okay.
Wisconsin, which Dewey was supposed to win. The Republican parties decided to see how General Douglas MacArthur would do. So the Wisconsin primary was basically between Dewey, MacArthur, and Stassen. And lo and behold, Stassen won the primary, and they really knocked out MacArthur from the race. I mean, he got a few votes here or there.
I would have thought he would have been a more powerful candidate.
Yeah, but he never really wanted to run.
Okay.
He was much more in tune with being a military officer, being the leader in Japan after the war, and then ultimately in 1949-50 becoming the Allied commander in Korea, the first Allied commander in Korea. Then the next interesting primary was in Oregon, and Stassen is now leading Dewey. At least in the pollings. I mean, the number of delegates, Dewey's still leading. But what happens is this is the first radio debate in a presidential primary. And it's on, I believe it's May 17th, 1948 in Oregon. And the debate is between only Stassen and Dewey. And the only subject of the debate is whether you should annul or declare the Communist Party of the United States illegal. Now,
really?
Yeah. Now, you would assume that Stassen would be in favor of not having it made illegal, and Dewey would be in favor of making it illegal based upon their prior proclivities. However, it was totally the other way around. Stassen was totally against the Communist Party, though Dewey was also against the Communist Party, but his comment was, how can you legislate ideas? And Dewey, the polling said that Dewey won the debate. Dewey won Oregon, and then ultimately Dewey won the Republican primary.
That is interesting. I wasn't aware of that. All right, so as we go into the fall here, I'm going to take each campaign separate. Well, I kind of can do the two minor guys together, and then we'll do the major ones separate because it's too much to throw in at once. As it goes into August and September, Dewey's lead goes from 48 to 37 over Truman, 5 for Wallace. As we get into September, Wallace begins to lose strength. Thurman starts to gain numbers. It's 48 Dewey, 37 Truman.
Truman, not Thurman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Dewey is at 48. Truman is at 37. Wallace is at 4. And Thurman's at 2. Now, the Wallace campaign began to what's the word I'm looking for? Scramble and stutter and lose votes because he almost came out and said he was a communist. And
well, that's certainly what Thurman, some of Truman's people and some of Dewey's people certainly said. And he did get most of his votes were from extreme left-wing politicos.
He lost support with, like everybody, like you just said, he lost. The left said he was too left. He went in, they had to get special security because he was campaigning in the South and wanted integrated rallies in 1948. I'm surprised, that there wasn't nothing more happened coming down into Mississippi campaigning like that.
certainly was not the. It certainly was before the time for integrated rallies in the South.
Oh yes, I mean that was I was shocked when I first read that. Now, you mentioned earlier about the the Democrats staying in the convention.
Correct.
Thurman did not. Yes, there was 37 delegates that walked out, but he didn't get the backing of the major players in the South. Talmadge of Georgia and the guy they called Boss Crump of Tennessee, they refused to support Thurman.
Yep.
What's
you know why?
Well, that's what I was fixing. What's the reasoning behind that?
Okay, you have the solid South.
Mm-hmm.
But both the major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, want to enfranchise more minority voters. If you enfranchise more minority voters, many of those voters at this time would be Republican voters, because even though the Republicans are the parties of big business, the Republicans are also the party of Lincoln and still from freeing the slaves.
Yeah, that's not that long. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you. And that's really not, that far removed when you think about 1860 to, 1948. You're just a generation or so.
That's right. So basically, in order to keep what you have, it's silly, maybe even stupid, to go out on a wing with a third party that, even if it does fairly well in the 1948 elections, unless it actually wins, it's not going to be around in 1952.
Truman, I mean, I keep saying that. Thurman's objective was not to win. He was hoping to throw it into the House, and they would have to give concessions.
That's also correct, but if you're a Democratic congressman, you have to make a Democratic leader. Make a decision.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Are you going to throw your whole career away to support this party right here? This, like I said, it's not going to be around in 1952. Okay, so we're getting into the fall now. We've covered those two guys. Truman comes into this thing, from my take, loose. He's behind in the polls. Everybody's predicted him to lose. He's campaigning like that. Give them hell, Harry. Playing I'm with Harry. The 80 do nothing Congress. The guttons calls the GOP the guttons of privilege. I'm sorry, what now?
The whistle stop campaign.
Whistle stop campaign calls the GOP gluttons of privilege, princes of privilege. Stack the pitchfork in the forest. He came out swinging, as if he had nothing to lose. What's your take on his campaign with this right here? I mean,
I think you're absolutely right. Dewey was an Easton lawyer. He was a prosecutor. He was governor of New York. He actually was almost assassinated by Dutch Schultz before the Second World War, but I could go into that in another time. But he was not a warm person. He was not the type that would go out on the hustings and campaign. He doesn't go out and shake hands and kiss babies. He thinks that the Republican plank that they approved at the convention is what the country needs, and what he's going to win with. And one of the things he wants to do, not as badly as Taft, but he wants to roll back the New Deal. He thinks that the New Deal is an economic disaster for the country.
That is the second comparison I wanted to make as far as the campaigning in the fall in 2016. Trump was going everywhere. He was making 4 or 5 stops a day, and he came out swinging, and he had everybody against him. And Hillary would come make 1 stop and go home. She played not to lose, much like the thing that I'm picking up here from Dewey. He was playing not to lose. He was just, I've got this thing. I'm not going to say anything crazy. Play it close to the vest, and I'm going to win this race. He had something crazy about your future lies in front of you. What do you have any takes on that? Or
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. He had what he had the 2 things we mentioned earlier. The fact that there were 4 Democratic presidential terms before him, and he thought that the country wanted a change. He thought the country would be better off with less with less unions, less small farms as opposed to big farms. He basically, again, he basically was, as you said, he was a glutton. He was a boss, and he thought his part. That's why his party would win. They did work for a federal civil rights litigation. They did work for anti-lynching, but they knew that these 2 probably wouldn't pass, especially because of the South. He wanted the abolition of the poll tax to get more voters in, because he figured that way he could get more black and minority voters in. But he was not a man of the people. He was a man of the upper class, and he could not.
I'm sorry. Truman's campaign, when you tell me man of the people, it was he's focused on laborers, farmers, blacks, and consumers.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just
no, you're absolutely right, and that's the important thing. Truman would get down and get dirty. Truman wanted to meet the people. Truman wanted them to see him, wanted them to know that he was at least one of them, and that he would try to alleviate the small depression, the small recession they were in now, and he would keep going. He wanted, I hate to go back, but chickens in every pot and a car in every garage.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something else. What's that now? Dewey playing it like that. Truman coming out swinging. In September, Truman was down by 17 points. And Truman kept hammering away, much like Trump did. The Republican delegation told Dewey to take the high road. I can remember Hillary saying that, when they go low, we go high. Except for one person. There was a Harry Darby from Kansas.
Yeah.
He told him, he said, you better attack. You better, because you're going to lose this race if you don't fight back.
Not only fight back, you got to go out and meet the people. You got to tell them that Tom Dewey is not a stuck-up prig, that he's a man who will be a good president.
We should have shown some warning signs here as we get into September and October. Dewey's crowds begin to get smaller and smaller as Truman is increase, much like 2016. You see, 25,000 people out there and 1,000 for Hillary. Bill Clinton actually told her that, said, I'm looking at these crowds. So as Truman's crowds increase, fewer and fewer coming to Dewey. Dewey starts spending money at a time like in theaters to run ads.
Yeah.
Truman's not. He's going out there. Now, there was a poll done among 20,000 Midwestern farmers in September, October, where Truman's down, but he beats Dewey 54-46. Things should have started clicking by this point.
Yeah.
What do you think? Just blind? I mean, they're just trusting these polls blindly.
Well, that's what the Republicans seem to do. The Republican whatever the Republicans' internal polls showed, they showed the same thing that the national polls would show. They showed that Dewey was comfortably ahead. Truman, on the other hand, said, what did he have to lose? He went out there and talked to the people.
I'm glad you brought that.
You said it right along. Dewey was playing not to lose. Dewey was trying not to make mistakes, not to put his foot in his mouth. He was playing the what do they call the football defense at the end of the game when you have a
prevent defense?
Prevent defense. That's what
much
Dewey
like
was
I mean,
doing.
it's much like, and I go back again. It was a little bit later, but in 2016, I think she had got out to an 11-point lead in early October, and these polls, even Gallup, should have known something was going on because they had a poll that came out in, what was it, September 24th. They had a Gallup report, and they showed that the race had shrunk to 46.5 to 38 to Truman as Wallace and Thurman began to lose support.
You mean Dewey? You mean Dewey,
yes.
Of course, not Trump.
Yeah, sorry. And all of these things I think it was Crossley, they even stopped polling people. But all of these numbers begin to suddenly narrow. And as you get to election day, it's like 50 to 45. But everybody still has, out of 50 experts, all 50 picked Dewey. Dewey had the backing of the major newspapers. All right, now, when we get into this thing, I want to touch on this, and then we'll talk about election night. What was it? Dewey's people were so confident of victory, they bought houses in Washington. Truman's people had already started accepting jobs. Truman's wife didn't even believe he was going to win. The only person who believed he was going to win was Truman. Truman made out an electoral map that had him with 340 electoral votes. Dewey's 104, 42 going to Thurman, and 37 undecided, which came pretty close.
That's right.
So election night, they come in there.
Truman was an optimist. Truman believed in himself, and he believed in the people.
And that's again the thing that comparison that day going in there. It's 2016. Who none of the pundits up there, gave Trump a chance. I mean, even going into the night, they were still, which brings me to another thing. You kept waiting all night in 2016. Oh, these numbers are going to change. These numbers are going to change whenever the city starts reporting. The NBC reporter, what was his name? Catton Born. He has so he says when the returns start coming in, much like 2016, Truman jumps out to a lead, and he says this will change.
Yeah.
When they start reporting, even as late as midnight, he keeps saying it's going to change. Truman had went to Kansas City, and Dewey was in New York City.
Yep.
Well, I'm guessing I don't know what time Dewey went to bed. I guess Truman went to bed early because he woke up at midnight and to find out that he was in the lead. So what's going on in these guys' minds? I mean, why Truman goes to bed and Dewey staying up, or I
don't think Dewey stayed up because Dewey was supremely confident that he was going to win in the end. That those states
went to bed?
were all going to win. I mean, Dewey did not believe that he was going to lose every state in the West except Oregon. No way. Dewey thought he was going to do much better in the Northeast and in the old Rust Belt.
That was his first sign too. Was when New York started. He was underperforming in the eastern states. That should have been his first sign.
And he actually lost Massachusetts and Rhode Island.
Because I remember make this comparison. James Carville said in 2016 when the first returns started coming in and those rural numbers, Trump was running 10, 12% higher. He said this is not isolated; it's a spillover, and you can see that in this race right here. As you said, the Oregon was the only state
west of Texas and Oklahoma to vote for Dewey.
So, how do these guys go to bed that early? I mean, did they have anybody that was staying up watching this thing going, hey, this is this is not how it's supposed to turn out. But I would just
Well,
think,
don't forget, we're not talking about 2020 or 2016 when you have instant news.
true.
These polls come in slowly. There's very few, if any, machines. These
Yeah.
ballots are counted by hand. And you stay all night counting ballots by hand. I know that because I counted absentee ballots for many years. And but when all the ballots are being counted by hand, you have to count them. Then you have to bring them to a registrar. Then you have to bring them to somewhere central in the state where the state puts them together. Then the state has to submit the ballots, and they have to be certified. So you're talking about, you're not talking about Illinois. Let's say Illinois is going to close at 10 o'clock, and you're going to have a prediction by 11 o'clock. Illinois is going to close by 10 o'clock, and you're not going to have a prediction until the next morning. But you'll have people. I mean, every single polling district, you'll have a Democrat, you'll have a Republican, you'll have a Dixiecrat if they're on the ballot, and you'll have one of Wallace's people, and they're going to be all over the count, checking and watching them to make sure that the count is reasonable.
how long? That's a good point that you brought up. Them coming in. How long would you think it would take for the first returns to start reporting that night?
First returns would start reporting really instantaneously. Now, the reason why I'm telling you that is because the first returns, do you remember Dixville Notch, New Hampshire?
They've picked every president since
No. Dixville Notch, New Hampshire is the very first place to vote. They vote at 1 minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
There are a lot of places that have picked every president, but a lot of them blew it in 2020 and 2016. But the thing is, those are not official until those would go to the county seat and then Concord, New Hampshire, which is the capital, and then they'll become official. So it's going to take. I mean, I guess you'd start having results coming in an hour and a half, 2 hours after the polls close.
But you wouldn't 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see.
Yeah.
I can't see you knowing anything at 7 o'clock.
Yeah. I just mean like the initial, we got 1% in, or we got how long it would, because when they close now, within 2 or 3 minutes, you've got, your first numbers coming in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's because we're talking about machines.
Because I was working with a candidate that was running for the Public Service Commission last time, and election night, I was plugged straight into the Secretary of State's office. So,
yeah,
I mean, like 7:02, I got the first returns that came out of this district in Fayette County. Just one box. 2 minutes later, there was one thing I wanted to say about. It's kind of just an odd, useless knowledge. Truman or Thurman was on all of the southern states, also Oklahoma, but in 4 states, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Alabama, he was listed as a Democratic candidate alongside Truman. But in Alabama, he was the only Democrat candidate on the ballot. They didn't even put Truman on there. And
okay.
Truman was also on the ballot in Thurman was also on the ballot in North Dakota. How he got on there, I don't know. Okay, so we come into that night, and so at 4 a.m. Truman wakes up, and he's up by 2 million votes.
Yeah, he's happy about what he sees, and he still believes in himself, and he believes that. And now with the Western states coming in, and he knows that he's up ahead in the Western states, and Dewey's in big trouble.
Kind of like back again, I remember that night they said, if you're, they paused it one time. They said, if you're the Trump campaign, you've got Oklahoma, you've got this, you're in good shape. These returns, I'm trying to picture it in my mind. To me, it almost mirrors those.
Can I make a comparison?
Yes, absolutely. Go right ahead.
I want to go to the race in 1980 with Reagan Carter,
Okay.
and they called that race for Reagan very early in the evening,
Okay.
before the polls closed out in the West Coast. So
Ah.
they think that a lot of people, because they quote knew that the race was over, decided not to vote, and they haven't been doing that since that. But
Well,
that's
if
the
you
whole
remember
type of thing.
in 2000, they called Florida with the Panhandle still open.
That's correct, and they got it
Yes.
wrong.
Um. So Truman wakes up at 4, and he has a Secret Service agent driving back. Says, looks like we're going to win this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Dewey stays up or Dewey gets up at 10 a.m., 10:30. He sees he's not going to win. 11:14, he messages Truman to concede.
Yeah,
Um,
he was as shocked as anybody else.
so the final comes out with Truman comes out with 303 electoral votes to Dewey's 189. Thurman's 39. Now here's where I want to get into some numbers. Truman got 24,179,347 votes to Dewey's 219, 912. Anyway, 219,000. All right, so I got to find some other stuff that was really interesting here. The polling, the way they did it, they did a sample or quota or something like they called it.
Quota sample, yeah, they're the same type.
Yeah. So they had like they would be given. You have to interview 7 white males under 40 in a rural area, 7 black females over 40 in a rural area, and then they got to pick however they wanted to. Throughout history or presidential races, usually your biggest voting bloc has been white males without college educated,
That's correct.
and we already know. Um, and and there's talk about I don't know how how the female vote, how strong it was then. Um, of course, in the South, a lot you had things that kept the blacks from voting. So you talking about middle man, that what it came down to was the average guy vote. Because where's this at? Michigan came out and did a study. The University of Michigan found that where do I have that? Oh, okay, 14% of Truman's voters decided a fortnight before the election. That 3,374,300 voters decided to vote for him in the final days. Gallup found that 1 in 7 voters, 6,927,000 people, decided in the last week. 75% of them voted for Truman. So what was going on here? Was they not giving people undecided, or was Dewey support that week? How did they miss it?
That's the question we want to ask. Polling in those days was not as scientific, obviously, and they didn't count the undecideds, and that may be and that's the place where people turned. I mean, you're showing Truman with momentum going forward. Every poll, even if they're wrong and Truman is leading, but every poll shows him getting closer and closer to Dewey. Every poll, every time he goes to a whistle stop, he gets 1,000 people in a little town. He gets 15,000 people in a little town.
Yeah.
He gets 10,000 people at a train station in a city. And these people want to see Truman. They want to hear Truman. Also, Truman was a Mason, so he was able to get some support from the Masonic lodges, even though they're not involved with politics. So he's a quote good man and true. So if he says something, you're actually going to believe him. Also, the buck stops here. Truman was not a person to blame somebody else for what's going on. Even Taft-Hartley, Truman said, "I made a mistake."
That's something else another comparison I wanted to make. 2016. Because I was following state by state, and that's one thing I wish I could see here. In 2016, the national polling ended up basically where it was. This one was exact opposite. Truman got 50%, Dewey's 45. But in 2016, going down there the final 7 days, I was looking at this and I said, he's closing the gap. I mean, he's narrowing in every one of these. I mean, the gap was closing, and you could see it every day. And it's obvious this is what was going on here. I guess that they were still polling is still such an infancy that they just ignored it. There's no thing I can come up with because Truman was surging. I mean,
well, basically, let's go back to Roosevelt's second election against Landon.
Yeah.
This was the first presidential poll. It was a telephone poll. The results showed that Landon was going to destroy FDR. Obviously, FDR took every single state except Maine and Vermont, and that's because who had the telephones? The wealthy Republicans. Polling gets better and better, and there's some blips along the way, but it's not an exact science.
No, and well, I lost my train of thought there. The polling, because he was closing. Both of them were closing, and this another comparison. That was that I found very unique or very interesting. Much like 2016, where it focused on the Rust Belt of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and came down to those three states where 100,000 votes, 200,000 votes, one way or another, was switched it. This right here came down to Illinois, California, and what was the other state? Illinois, California, Ohio, and a shift that was 78 electoral votes, and a shift of 29,000 votes would have won that race for Dewey. Much like, just a few votes would have shifted the one in 2016.
That's why it's very important to get out and vote, because your vote may not mean anything, but if your vote with 16 or 17 others could swing a district, which could swing a state. And that's why there are voting blocks that certain candidates appeal to. That's why you want to capture women, and you want to capture blacks, and in some states you want to capture Jews, it's important to get your people out. There's the old jokes, and they're not so much jokes. To vote early and vote often. Get the graveyard vote. Do what you have to do, but you got to get people at the polls. You got to get people to vote.
I think that's what you just hit on is so important right there. Is you got to get your people out. Bottom line, you got your voter person who gets their people to the polls is going to be voting, and that was the last comparison I had with that is people were so in. I don't know if I'm trying to make a comparison between Clinton and Dewey that people just didn't go out and vote for her, didn't go out and vote for him, or maybe they just thought they had it in the bag. Maybe a combination of both.
I think Hillary Clinton was a bit of a flawed candidate. I don't think she was. She certainly was not as well liked as her husband. She was. She could be condescending. She also thought that she was going to win, so she also didn't put enough effort in it. I mean, she basically told her husband not to campaign for her.
Yeah, she pretty much did. Because they said that she had told him that you're losing this race, and she flew into a rage, and we'll save that for another time. So there was one other thing that I wanted to point out in this polling. Gallup had been off in every race since they had started on the Republican vote by 3 to 6 points.
Okay.
I don't know how Gallup. I mean, and I guess that if it was all quota, but I don't know how Gallup was missing this. Anyway, I mean, like I said, that was the infancy of polling. I guess they've learned a lot since then, or tried to.
Yeah, well, how they missed it was they weren't taking the proper sample. That's it. I mean, I mean, but the issue is, how do you get the proper sample?
Exactly.
And you need, and you work with psychologists and you work with statisticians. One of my favorite textbooks, and I was a psych major, was How to Lie with Statistics, and I wrote a term paper on it. But that's the whole thing. You need to be able to get the proper data and interpret it properly, and that's what Gallup didn't do.
Don't you think that's? I mean, but that's still kind of an impossible science, because if your voters are motivated, they're going to go stand in that line for 10 hours. If you're candidate's kind of aloof, so I mean. Go back and get people out the poll. Do you think
that's the whole option? You try to get as close as you can with the data you can collect. If do you think that you saw it in 2016, Trump was closing the gaps. Trump was getting nearer and nearer in every poll, and in most of the battleground states. Who knew that Wisconsin and Michigan were going to be battleground states? They have been solid Democratic states for years.
Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Wisconsin had not went Democrat since '84. They voted for Michael Dukakis. Michigan and Pennsylvania hadn't went Democrat since '88.
That's what you meant. They hadn't gone Republican since '84.
Yeah. They've been safe Democratic states. She didn't even campaign there.
Pennsylvania was a swing vote. Pennsylvania was a state that could go either way.
Yeah, but it hadn't went since '88 as Michigan did.
Basically, what you have to do as a Democrat in Pennsylvania is you have to get big leads coming out of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and then hope that you hold on.
James Carville said, Pennsylvania's like Pittsburgh on one side, Philadelphia on the other, and Alabama in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing with New York. If you were a Democrat and you didn't come out of New York City with 1 million voter at 850,000 person lead, you were going to lose the state, because the only other city in New York that was reliably Democratic was Buffalo.
Huh. Yeah, because you just got me thinking about upstate New York now and all those. Yeah. And I'm beginning to.
Rochester and Albany could be Republican cities.
So, what do you think with 48? Do you think that Truman's voters were just more motivated, or that they missed the polling, or a combination of everything?
Combination of both. I think that once Truman got the nomination, Truman was going to go out and do everything he could. He was going to woo the voters, shake hands, kiss babies, the whole 9 yards of political cliches. Well, Dewey was not that type of person. Dewey was going to talk and stand on the plank that he thought was going to win. He was not the type to go out and kiss babies or to shake hands. He thought that his Republican Party would rally around him and would be able to bring in the undecided votes, but they weren't. And I mean, he was pro-labor, he was pro-farm, but he didn't come out that way. The Republican Party wanted to take apart the New Deal. The New Deal, whether it was right or wrong, and there's a lot of experts either way who said it was the wrong way to get out of the Depression. Whether it was right or wrong, the American people thought it was right. The American people were getting jobs and food and Social Security and other things. And this is what. And when you tell them that no, we want to dismantle this, we want to go back to the beginning, you're going to have a lot of people against you. And Wallace didn't play it up hard enough.
that was 2 points else I wanted to make before I forget them that I forgot. One, talking about the campaigning. If you remember there going down the final days, Hillary was up there on stage with JC and Beyonce, I think, and she looked absolutely ridiculous up there. A 70-year-old white woman with 2 rappers. And, she had all the heavy hitters out there campaigning for her. And Trump said something like, I don't need a microphone or a piano. I'm going it alone. And that's those 2 images I can see a comparison with. And the last one is what you just said about how the New Deal people identified with it. Truman was put in a tough situation because he's taking over for somebody who's very popular, much like Hillary was trying to take Obama's place. In the Democratic Party, you can't do that. How do you? As popular as what they were in the Democratic Party, how do they live up to that?
Yeah,
I mean, so you've just replaced Roosevelt with Truman, and you're placing Obama with Hillary. If you're a Democrat, is that going to make you? Are you going to be motivated or?
But the issue there was Truman had been a sitting president for over 3 years.
True, that's true.
So true. He had some coattails, he had some credit, and he knew how to get around and get out to the people. He knew what issues would sell. He was. He knew when he made a mistake. He knew that, as I said, the buck stopped here, and he knew to admit it and just go out and fix it.
Why was farmers such a big voting bloc in 48?
Farmers are always a big voting bloc because most farmers are small, independent farmers. They're not the big corporations they are now. So basically, they want to be able to make sure that they can afford grain and they can afford silos and they can afford tractors. And Truman is playing up to this. Truman wants to give the farmers the livelihood that they need. It's a different thing. Again, you think of certain states, but the state of Michigan State University is the largest college by area in the United States. Most of that area is farms and farmland and scientific things. And you're talking about millions of acres. And the farmers, small farmers, are the backbone of your economy there. And self-sufficient farmers. They want to stay on their farm. They've been on these farms since the 1700s or the 1800s. They don't want to lose them.
Point, yeah. Their whole family's been there. Yeah, I think I've covered everything. I mean, is there anything else you wanted to add to it, Larry?
No, I'm okay. Again, it's important when you look at politics, and we're going to try and do every single election, that you're going to see that what it comes down to is the record, what people want, and what you can tell the people that you can do for them. It's almost like Kennedy in reverse. Ask not what you can do for your country. Ask what your country can do for you. And in that case, you want somebody. I hate to say it, but you want somebody who can be able to get your county a road or a grain silo or an electrical plant. That's one other thing. Dewey, when he dismantling the New Deal, wanted to get rid of the utility monopolies that were in place based on government monopolies. He actually was taking Wendell Willkie's stance from 8 years before and saying we have to allow individual or corporate or private competition with the utilities, and that didn't work either, because you're taking away inexpensive electricity or inexpensive gas from the people, and you're starting it into a competition. And a lot of people, who worked in as you had said in one of our earlier meetings, a lot of people who worked in the TVA in northern Alabama.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why don't you bring that up?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. The North Alabama, as the whole state had went Republican, North Alabama remained a Democratic seat and a Democratic bastion in Congress and in other places throughout there up until 2012, and it was all because of the TVA employed everybody in those counties up there in that region. It wasn't until 2012 was. I think they lost it in one term, but yeah, it had been a Democratic seat. It was safe up until about 2012 is when it finally lost it. But it was because of that. The TVA employed everybody up there, so they were voting for those routes.
Yeah. And they certainly voted for them in 1948 because they didn't want to have a chance of losing their job and losing cheap power.
And one thing I wanted to mention that you brought up a while ago, the Republicans missed out on a real opportunity that still haunts them to this day because they wanted a civil rights plank.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it didn't follow through with it or I don't know, but they dropped the ball on that. I mean, missed out on a lot of voters.
Well, they followed through
still the party of Lincoln.
They followed through on it, but the thing was, so did Truman. And Truman and Truman was a person who knew blacks. He lived in small town, rural Missouri, and whatever. He was in World War I. He knew blacks, and he could talk to them also. Dewey could not.
Good point. That's very good. Because the way I read about this, I mean, Truman believed in this. That's why he wouldn't back down from his aides when they put that more liberal civil rights plank in there. He believed this, and he wanted to do he thought the morally right thing, and that's what he didn't back down from his aides. He wanted the more moderate stance on civil rights.
Yeah,
he truly, he believed he believed he wanted to do that, and he thought it was the right thing to do. It wasn't just a
Yeah, I mean, he as we said, he was moral. He wanted to do the right thing. He wanted to help the people, and he knew that he was the man for the job, whether he's going to win or not. But he was going to do everything he possibly could to win.
And that'll be fun whenever we do 2016 to compare Trump to how he related to the common man whenever we do that race. But this has been a fun one to start off with, Larry. I enjoyed this, man.
I think 1948 was one of the more interesting elections that we could have started with.
Biggest upset ever?
No, I don't think so. I think the biggest upset ever is John Quincy Adams over Andrew Jackson.
That's actually the one I want to do next. Is 1824.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I've got. Other than that, Larry, I guess I will see you next time.
Yep. Be well.
Thanks, Larry. We're